Hi, I'm Meshal Malik and you're watching Indus Special. Why are women less likely to be in leadership positions than men? This question has often been at the heart of much debate across the world. And as the debate gains more momentum, many believe that significant progress has also been made. But according to the World Economic Forum's latest Global Gender Gap report, it would take 202 years to close economic gender gaps around the world. When equality is the goal, but progress seems to be slow, what more needs to change? That's our discussion today. Joining us for this is Professor Cary, who is a professor of organizational psychology and health at the Manchester Business School. He joins us from Manchester. Also joining us is Ms. Maleeha Hussain, who's the executive director at Mehergar, a center for learning. Her areas are of focus of human development and gender and development. She joins us from Islamabad. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Ms. Hussain, let me begin with you. Now, when we hear a lot of the debate regarding gender equality, there are many goals, many ideals that are set. But what do you think it practically means to close these gender gaps?
To me, one of the biggest challenge for bringing women up to positions in organizations or senior positions or women empowerment, reducing the gender gap, is the fact that we live in patriarchal societies. And, if you look at all the countries in the world today, they all have patriarchal systems. You only find very few smaller communities that have matriarchy. So in my opinion, that is the biggest challenge that we face, not just men, but the whole society, men, women, transgenders. They all consider men to be higher beings. They have a higher status in the society. Women are looked down upon. We demean them. Women themselves feel and believe that they are not as good as men. I hear a lot of very educated, successful women, when you start talking to them, they do believe that they are in a lot of ways lesser than men. So patriarchal system, the way we are socialized, as we raise our children, giving the impression to our sons that they are better human beings, training and socializing our daughters to be submissive and to be quiet. And, when girls don't stand for their rights, they are considered to be good girls.
Right. So that is what... I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to get to this main discussion that we're having. And as you've mentioned and stated, it's a very layered issue. It begins from the socialization, initial primary socialization process, and leads up to when women are working in the workplace, how they perceive themselves, how others perceive them. But when we're talking about all of what is happening in today's age, there is a lot of debate and discourse, as I mentioned earlier. Do you feel like the narrative or the conversation has shifted and positively shifted?
It's in the process of shifting. You don't see change as going from one mindset to the other. There's always a process. There are people who are leading the social change. There are some, behind them. And then there are the laggards who are the last ones to accept this change process or to join in. So it's always a process. Right. And we do see it shifting because, there is a small percentage of women heading 500 Fortune companies. So
6% to be precise, which is very insignificant.
The fact that they are there in those positions shows that the process has started.
Right.
We just have to do more to ensure that there are more women. When I say patriarchy, the society says that men are decision makers. The society gives men the responsibility of deciding for their families, and because they are decision makers at home, they are expected to be better decision makers. So even in the organization, when there are openings in very senior positions, at the back of our heads, a lot of people still believe that men are better decision makers. They forget.
And Ms. Hussain, on that point, stay with me. I want to bring Cooper into this conversation as well. Professor Cooper, now, Ms. Maleeha Hussain makes an interesting point that it's not just about what people around women perceive their potential to be. It's also women themselves. Many a times they underestimate their potential. How does this play out in the workplace? And what factors lead to many women not aiming for leadership positions?
Well, I think certainly, absolutely, the culture is the important thing and the gender roles that people have in society. But even if you go to cultures which are more egalitarian, which, allow more women into a variety of different roles, say in Scandinavia and some of Western European countries, even in those contexts, if you look at the FTSE 100, we used to have 7 women who were CEOs. We're down to 6 now. If you look at the FTSE 250 companies, only 5 women are CEOs. So we do have an issue within the organization itself. And I think there are several ones. Here are some of the issues, I think. Number one, male-dominated cultures at the top are long hours. And that's antithetical to women still feeling that they want to have a career, get to the top, but also want to have a family. So a long hours culture is one problem. Another problem is that men play politics better in organizations than women because they perceive their primary role as work. That's their major identity. So they play politics a lot better than women. Women actually get on with the job and they think that's going to be good enough for them to get rewarded and move up the hierarchy. But actually,
what do you mean by politics? That's an interesting question. I'm sorry to interrupt a line of thought there, but I do want to know more about what you mean by this politics. How are men playing smarter at it?
No, yeah, men are smarter at playing organizational politics. What they're looking for is their career to get to the top. Women tend, on balance, to work really hard, very vigilant and dedicated to what they do. They don't think about, well, if I do that, it's going to get me an advance. What they do is they do the job better. They do the job really well, because that's what they feel they should do. So they don't play the organizational politics that men play to get to the top. So that's a skill. Either they have to learn or we have to detrain men. That's another issue. Another factor is I think women, in a way, and I think this is what your previous speaker said, I think women don't have the kind of self-confidence or project the self-confidence in the workplace that men do. And that's important because men know how to play the role out of appearing to be very successful and effective. And finally, and I think this is really important, the men in their life, their partners, their husbands or whatever, don't give them the support that they need. And and that is the problem. They don't, their careers, in a sense, they perceive their careers to be more important than their wife or partner's careers. You mix all that together and you have problems of women trying to get to the top.
Right. There's a number of interesting things you brought up there, Professor Cooper, and I want to get to them, but I want to jump back to Ms. Hussain and talk to her about that specific point. Ms. Maleeha Hussain, it seems like the workplace is also impacted by what is happening in one's personal life, and women are many times influenced by their male partners, by any male member within their family. Even when women are contributing more to the household, why do you think that still consists to be a persistent problem?
Again, I'll go back to patriarchy. Women are expected to take care of the responsibilities at home, and men are given the responsibility to provide for the families. So men, looking at the larger society, have the responsibility to provide, so their job, their career are always given a priority. The work that they do, because it provides for the family, it's always at a higher status or a higher level, or considered at least that way. Even women who work and who earn and who do contribute to the responsibilities of the family, they have to earn, and they also have to take care of the responsibilities at the home. And there's always this feeling like my primary role is to take care of the men in the family and the rest of the family. So that, in her mind, is her primary role. So the job becomes, or the career becomes, a secondary role. So the man's work, the man's, whatever his career is, it always is considered more important. The woman might be bringing in more money, but her role, because it's considered to be taking care of the family as the primary role, that the career becomes secondary in her own mind and even within the family.
Right. Now, this, of course, goes back to an economic model that is in place, which disadvantages many women, whether it comes to how they manage their work-life balance or how they operate within an organization. We're going to talk about that further on in the show. Professor Cooper, something that you mentioned was something that you agreed upon, what was brought up by Ms. Maleeha Hussain as well, which is women underestimating their potential. Now, there's a thing known as microaggressions within an organization, things that make a person feel comfortable but might not be very explicit. That, along with explicit factors, what do you think makes women continuously, reinforces this notion within women that they don't deserve a raise, they don't deserve to go out and ask for a raise, they don't deserve a promotion? What do you think those aggressions and those factors are?
Well, to be honest with you, part of that comes from the men themselves that they work with, because they play the politics, they know how to do it. A lot of men, by the way, feel threatened by women, because if you look in Western Europe, for example, you will find that women get better degrees than men at university. Men are beginning to be threatened by women in the workplace. If they are, then men can actually undermine their self-confidence. And by the way, they come into male-dominated environments anyway with less self-confidence. And if they're managed, and they're likely to be managed by a man who themselves may feel threatened by this person who may take their job ultimately away, they manage that process. And I think that inhibits women from, and not only that, women generally don't feel, they think that their bosses, whoever they are, and usually they're male, let's say, that their bosses are going to acknowledge and understand that they're making a contribution, and therefore would give them a raise if they were good enough. So what we need more women to do is be not aggressive, but more assertive in looking at their careers vis-a-vis their boss or senior people in the organization, plan their careers better, confront the fact that they're not getting adequately paid. And the gender pay gap in various countries is still profound. Even in the most developed countries in the West, you'll find the gender pay gap anywhere between 15 and 25%. So they need to be more assertive about that and get the kind of recognition that they want. But they're only going to do that by, unfortunately, and I don't like saying this, but by playing the political games that men play.
Professor Cooper, in this discussion, the one problem I have is that it puts a lot of weight on the woman to perform in a certain way to get what she deserves. We're discounting the employer psychology in all of this. Now, an employer, of course, makes a cost-benefit analysis when they hire someone, when they decide to promote someone. Take us through what you have seen throughout your experience as playing into, let's say, a male CEO's mind when he hires a woman, especially a woman who has a family life. What leads to them making certain decisions that undermine a woman's potential?
Listen, by the way, I think there are solutions to this, but the solutions are things like they're doing in Norway. So we need the pipeline. We need women to move up the hierarchy. We don't want to just appoint a stellar, iconic kind of woman, one woman, to take the CEO's job or be on the board. And
I agree with that. There are ways to go around it, but I would like still the take what an employer psychology is behind it. Now, we hear a lot about the motherhood penalty, which means that if a mom takes maternal leave, she will be penalized for that in the workplace. That, of course, is just one part of the problem. There are many other factors that lead to many ways in which women are undermined. What do you think goes behind an employer's or a CEO's thought process?
Okay, I'm not sure it's the CEO, but let's say a senior male manager. I think the thought process is we want total commitment. We want this person to work long hours like the men do. They come early, they stay late. We want them totally committed. We don't want, if they're going to have a child, fine, but we want them to take a minimal amount of time. We don't want them to work flexibly. See, that's another issue, the flexible working arrangements. It's very difficult to pursue a career, for a woman to pursue a career, if the cultural role is still, yeah, you can go to work, but we also expect you to look after the kids. That's not a man's role. And believe me, even in the most developed Western countries, you still have that mentality that, that women should be committed. They should be there. They shouldn't take flexible working, although that is beginning to change, thank goodness. Because women, as long as the cultural roles are the way they are, then women still are juggling the double shift, the shift of the home and the shift at work.
Right.
But the CEO...
Right. Professor Cooper, stay with me on that point. Ms. Maleeha, Hussain, as I alluded towards this, we're going to talk about this later on in the show. I guess the time to talk about it is now. What is this wider economic model that exists? Of course, we have to take into account how the cost-benefit analysis is made. It's made purely on the basis of how much an employee will give back to an organization. That's how they count in their value. How do you think that needs to change? What policies, what development policies need to be put in place which allow women to also have a family life, but also be good at what they do and be able to pursue what they do?
Right. See, one thing is that as more women join the workforce, we'll have a larger pool of women where there'll be more options for women rising to the top. So that is one thing. Policies where we encourage more women to join the workforce, to increase our pool whereby more women can rise to the top. So that could be one policy. Another one could be taking care of or considering the needs of women. But, we have to remember that not all women, yes, majority of them have family lives, but there are younger women who have not started their families and whose career is more important to them than getting married and having children. I see today, even in Pakistan, a lot of young women who are very focused on their career, and despite the social pressure of getting married and starting a family, to them, their career and their jobs are more important. So, when we say that, yes, they have their jobs, but they also have their family responsibilities, I see more and more young professional women who want to focus on their career. So there's a shift that I see there. And my other, like your other guest was talking about the politics of men. That is an issue. So organization having some sort of policies of making very professional decisions based on merit when it comes to promoting people. Because I know, like over the years, I've seen that a lot of these decisions are made after office hours, when the men are sitting and socializing.
Ms. Hussain, on that, hold on to that now. I want to also introduce Ms. Phaedra Gibson, who is BMT's head of training. She's an expert in training in the British defense and security sector. She joins us from Bath. Thank you so much, Ms. Gibson, for joining us. And you join us on a very interesting point in the discussion, which is women being penalized for trying to have other things going on in their life, which is, of course, the family, other personal things that happen. How does the system need to change in order to accommodate women more?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I can only comment from my personal experience. I come from a background of working in the military, but I'm also a mother to 4 children, and I have a husband that works full-time as well. So in my experience, it is a matter of balance and give and take. And in terms of the context of business, it's about finding an organisation where there's a cultural fit that meets your needs and your expectations for the working environment. And I think there are organisations out there which support senior females and female leadership and encourage and mentor. And it's about finding that organisation that allows you to be the sort of worker you want to be and get that balance that's required.
Right, but let's say if someone doesn't get that lucky to find that organization, which of course is as best of a fit as you are stating, there still needs to be some regulation, wider regulation that allows women to be able to pursue their jobs in meaningful ways and get rewards in meaningful ways.
I can only say that I see that there is the opportunity there from my experience, but often I find that women tend not to be confident about speaking up about their needs and requirements and finding the language and words in a positive way that can encourage a change of culture around them that then allows them to encourage that sort of policy change.
Right.
So
how can a workforce culture, on that point, Ms. Gibson, how can a workforce culture empower women, support women, and instill that confidence within them?
I think we have to start as ourselves and as individuals explaining what it is that we need from our work environment rather than expecting a culture to dictate it on us ourselves. And so we have to have a voice, and everyone is different and everyone's needs are different. And so by creating blanket policies, I think demean the individual requirements that women have depending on what their personal circumstances are. So it's about having a voice and feeling confident to sit at the table and express what your own needs are, and not being fearful of that. And that's my personal experience about being able to do that and shape the working environment around me. And I've found historically people very amenable to that.
Right. So, Ms. Gibson, you, of course, are talking from your personal experience, and the position you have is somewhat rare for a female to be in. What were the hindrances and hurdles that you had to face, and how did you go around them?
Okay, so for me, it has been the risk that I've taken in terms of not spending as much time with my children, perhaps as I might like to have done, but in order to invest in my career and profession. And I've been allowed to do that by having a supportive husband who's very keen that I fulfill my abilities at work and in the working environment. So for women that don't have that and aren't lucky enough to have a supportive partner, then I can understand that it's very, very difficult. And then for me, it's about having childcare that allows me as well to commit to the working environment. And again, I understand that there are certain places where that is just not accessible or affordable. And in terms of government policy, where government does financially support those where they can get childcare, particularly at a younger age, then that definitely does enable women to lean into the work environment if they so wish.
Right. Professor Cooper, now, as Ms. Gibson stated, in her case, she had a support system which helped her get where she wanted. Of course, that did come at a cost as well. That goes back to proving the earlier point, which is that there needs to be some regulations in place which also help women who lack a support system. Childcare is one of the main essential points that come up in these discussions. How do you see a shift in how managers and management at the top level sees childcare, values how important childcare is for the employee?
Yes. To be honest with you, I mean, what I think is really important for women, obviously childcare. It's very costly, but we need to have that and most countries have some form of it, but not enough. Really important for women is flexible working. In the UK government 2 years ago passed a law, which I think is really laudable, and we need more of these laws, that every person, man, woman, young, old, who works in an organization has the legal right to request flexible working. And the employer has the legal obligation to tell them why they can't have it. They're not automatically entitled to it, but women need not only childcare, they need frequently to work flexible working until the roles between men and women in society becomes more egalitarian, where men participate more in family life. And in many developed countries, even like the UK, men don't. not as much as women do, because women feel it's part of their role in society. Until that changes, we need flexible working, we need childcare, we need men to, within relationships, to support women who are going to work. And we need a pipeline of women up the hierarchy. We don't need them just on the boards of companies. We need them all the way up the pipeline, because then they will influence a culture in such a way that women will be able to feel more self-confident, will get the support systems they need.
Right. Ms. Gibson, now, as Professor Cooper has stated, that women also need to be at the top in order to influence a certain culture that exists throughout the organization. He put forth a number of interesting points. How do you see that as being important in your personal view? A woman in a top position, how does she influence the overall culture?
I think that strong and positive leadership, whether that's male or female, is fundamental to the success of a business and fundamental to the happiness of the employees. And so making sure that our leadership understand the needs of individuals and different groups within the organization is the important strategic goals that we should be aiming for. For me, making sure that I have diversity of thought in my teams is really important to me. And whether that means diversity of gender or age, it's important that my teams reflect that different thinking in order to make sure that we have that competitive edge.
Right. Ms. Maleeha, now through our conversation, we've been talking about what happens when women are within a given job or within a given organization. But we do know in many parts of the world, there still exist many stringent barriers to entry within a profession. Take us through some of the reasons why they still are there and what can be done on a policy level to get through with them.
Yeah, I can give you the example of Pakistan. I know that a lot of organizations, government and private sector organizations, are fixing quotas that we will have at least 10% women or at least 30% women. And I know of organizations in Pakistan that are saying that we will have 50%, at least 50% women in the next 10 years, depending on where they are. And then they are making conscious efforts to increase the number of female employees. We also see women wanting to start careers in different fields, in different sectors. Like, for example, we see women joining all the police departments, including commandos, which is a very positive trend. We have women, even commercial pilots. I see women, a lot more engineers, because that is what they study. Their parents are allowing them to study whatever they are good at. And when they come out of the universities and when they do good, companies are hiring them because they've decided that they're going to increase the number of women employees or female employees. So getting a good education in different fields, jobs available, organizations making those policies where they want to increase the number of women. So I see a very positive trend in the society, public and private sector, where I see it happening. Earlier, we were deciding or discussing childcare and flexible hours. I see that happening in Pakistan also, and also globally.
Ms. Hussain, since we're running short on time, I'm going to get a last comment from Professor Cary Cooper on this. Professor Cary Cooper, we've been having this discussion for quite a bit of time now. But what is the ultimate benefit, not just to the women who are being more participatory within an organization, but to the overall culture and the economy, if women do become more active and are able to become more active within organizational cultures?
There's a lot of evidence that shows that as long as you have women throughout the pipeline in your organization, it will contribute to the bottom line, to shareholder value, to profits. There's a lot of evidence on this. That's why Norway decided on having boards where 40% of the board minimally has to be women, because they looked at the evidence on when you had women on boards of companies and you had them in senior management roles, it delivered to the bottom line. Because diversity, if you have everybody the same, and it's in a homogeneous senior management team and board and everything else, you're not going to get the innovation. You're not going to get the off-the-wall ideas and product development. So it's very important for the bottom line.
Right. And I think that's something that will make sense to a lot of people when you see that it's not just about, as important as it is to make a society more inclusive, there are real benefits that come with doing that. Thank you so much, Professor Cary Cooper, for joining us from Manchester, Ms. Maleeha Hussain for joining us from Islamabad, and Phaedra Gibson for joining us from Bath. We're going to go for a short break. When we return, we're going to continue our discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. While we talk about how women in organizations can be empowered and how they can empower themselves. Now joining us for this discussion is Mr. Marko Burazor, who's a communication expert joining us from Belgrade. Thank you so much, Mr. Burazor, for joining us. Now, a lot of what we were talking about in the earlier segment was revolving around how women can communicate what they want and their potential more effectively. What are some of the important things that employees, and specifically women employees, need to do in order to communicate how they are progressing and what their potential is and what their demands are?
They need to have, thank you for inviting me on the show. And first, they need to be clear in communication. And they need to have a body language that communicate the verbal things they are communicate to be us. Most mistakes coming that in business, females more has some acting like girls in terms of family, of some society traits that bring them on the work. So in order
But what does that mean? What does that mean, acting like a girl disadvantages them in the workplace?
That's the the most surveys, around 60%, it was did survey in United States. That's the 60% mistakes that were made by females in business. And
but I want to understand, what does it mean to act like your gender within a workplace?
For me, that's a good thing, but some people from male side don't assess on the right way. Some communication that coming from females in business. So in order, there is in Fortune, 500 leaders, Huffington Post did the research, only 23 leaders on 500 list is by females. And most female leaders are looking like a man and try to copy those patterns.
So here's the thing, Mr. Burazor. Now, this is one of the most controversial points within this entire discussion, which is that masculine traits are rewarded, and women are only rewarded when they adopt those masculine traits or when they act like men. Now, why do you think that is necessary to do in order to move towards success? I mean, it shows and alludes towards a larger problem within the entire system, which means that you do, at the end of the day, only attain success if you act like a man.
For example, me in my business, I only work with females because they have more empathy in themselves. They're better in teamwork. They have better big picture, and generally, women are better listeners and communicators. But I'm telling you what is the situation in the world, and that is changing. That is changing, and I see in my region still there is we have, for example, female prime minister, and many women are much more involved in leadership roles. We have Angela Merkel from Germany. We have in Finland very young lady as a prime minister. So
Mr. Burazor, stay with me on that point. I also want to introduce another guest who's joined us, Mr. Patrick Sullivan, who's an analyst and Chief Executive Officer of leading UK think tank, which is Parliament Street. He joins us from London. Mr. Sullivan, now we're having this discussion, which means, and which is leading up to this conclusion that male traits are rewarded. Now, Mr. Burazor is talking about how that is changing, but that does seem to be the dominant narrative, that women can only be successful when they stand like a man, when they talk like a man. Why do you think that notion still exists after so much conversation that we're having, which is to appreciate women for their own qualities?
I think that's the wrong argument. There's a lot of studies about this which show that it's not really about male characteristics as much as it is about confidence. And men have, in society, boys have often been pushed into doing things, and women have been sort of told it's better to be shy, retiring, and not get your voice heard and not speak up. There's a great book called The Confidence Code by Kathy Kay and Claire Shipman, which talks all about this. And they give an example, I believe, about a newsroom where some of these sort of big international newsrooms where the group of journalists assembled, there's an opportunity to go to the Paris bureau, but the sort of executive producer asks, does anybody know French? And you've got a woman who has sort of got up to university level sort of studying French, and then you've got a man who has basic knowledge of French, I could say a few phrases. The woman will not put herself forward because she'll think, well, do I not know enough? Whereas the man will sort of, to use a sort of colloquial term, blag it. The real thing is that what we need to install in the next generation of young women is the confidence to put themselves forward and lean in, as it were.
Mr. Sullivan, I agree with you there that it, of course, and many times the fact that women, their confidence has been undermined throughout various periods of their life, which leads to for them to believe that in the workplace they need to react that out. But now when we're talking about more systematic change and how this can be addressed, one thing, of course, is to keep in mind is how women can be appreciated for some things that they bring to the table. Mr. Burazor earlier mentioned a quality such as empathy, women being more empathetic. How can that become more appreciated within a company?
Well, I mean, women are over 50% of most populations. So first, they are a key demographic that is undercatered for. And when it comes to sort of workplace environment, you find sort of incidences of workplace bullying and workplace harassment are far fewer under female leadership. But so that is true. There's a very sort of male, macho sports team culture, which is not exactly welcoming to women in the workplace. But it's also not welcoming to certain men in the workplace either. It sort of harkens back to sort of caveman times, as it were.
Right. Stay with me on that point. Mr. Burazor, as you're hearing about this, what Mr. Sullivan is talking about is this boys' culture, which has often persisted for a very long period of time. Now, when we talk about a safe working environment, one that allows everyone's potential to flourish, how are men, and if there is any training, of men becoming more welcoming to diversity within an organization, trying to let go of this boys' culture?
I see when I travel and when working with companies, mostly I'm working as a consultant and communication expert in companies, some difference between men and women on the workplace are erasing. And it's much more For example, when I worked in some companies and big companies, my heads, my bosses were female. So in Serbia and in region, which is sometimes said they have some prejudice that is more traditional, that line between female and male are less obvious than it may be in some other country, because I don't know, it changed in last 10 years quite significantly. I said before, we have a prime minister, and we have many ministers that are female, and they impacting in order to make laws in
right. And Mr. Burazor, sorry to cut you off, but since we're running short on time, that is an important point you're alluding towards. Their political representation at the top by females is seen to have great implications across the economy, across the society. It helps women be more empowered. This, of course, means that our systems need to change. There needs to be more room, more space, and more empowerment of women to come to those positions and help bring about that change. On that point, thank you so much, Mr. Marko Burazor, for joining us from Belgrade, Mr. Patrick Sullivan for joining us from London. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.